very pleased to be able to address you. I'm sorry I'm not there with you in person for your conference in Gdansk. I must preface everything that I say with an acknowledgement that I'm not an eco-scientist and I cannot speak in a technical terminology of the experts. Perhaps it's actually a good thing that we speak in non-technical terminology and use a language that everyone can understand. Having said that, I stand in amazement that so many people still do not seem to be able to accept the overwhelming evidence that we are damaging the environment, destroying the biodiversity of our world, and exploiting nature, which God has entrusted to us as stewards. I feel very indebted to Pope Francis for his global understanding of the dangers which face our world and his insistence that everything is connected. Our care for the environment, which for the moment remains alarmingly ignored by politicians and industrialists, cannot just be about melting ice caps, wildfires, droughts and floods elsewhere. We need urgently to see that nature is a global and complex unity and is made up of a great variety of elements, all having a unique, important part to play in maintaining a harmony of well-being. We intrude on the balance of nature in so many ways. There is an urgent challenge to make the working of our complex world sustainable for future generations, not only repairing the damage that we've done, but enhancing the gift of creation for all those who will follow us in future generations. The human race has never managed to live in harmony with our world. From hunter-gatherers to the farming generations, humanity has not replaced loss or repaired damage, but it's never been on such a scale as at present. For centuries, human actions did not have any dangerous impact. But in the last 2 centuries, in particular, humanity has become ruthless in its exploitation of our world, particularly in the industrialized nations. To a certain extent, we might be able to accept that much of the original damage was done in ignorance. The mining of coal and its use may not have been understood as affecting the atmosphere, though the smog which enveloped our industrial cities and its impact on health might have given at least some clue. The use of fossil fuels and their impact was first studied 70 years ago, but the preliminary findings about their causing global warming were concealed. We're now benefiting so much from the amassing of knowledge about how our world works and how all creatures have a role to play in its flourishing. Although there is still a long way to go, we are coming to a much clearer understanding, for example, that the warming of the oceans has a direct impact on marine life and the flourishing of fish and the marine food chain. We're measuring the impact of deforestation, the melting of ice caps, and the damage done by waste, particularly in contaminating our water. We are learning so much more about biodiversity and the complexity of nature, in which millions of species have their part to play, and how easy it is for us to blunder in and disrupt that balance. I appreciate that the Congress of Catholics in Poland discusses urgently needed social solutions to environmental problems. I know that you intend to focus especially on the issue of wise management of water, the source and condition of all life. Water shortages, the drying up of vast areas of the earth, floods, droughts, and related fires are increasingly a daily reality in many places. They are destroying human settlements, making people homeless, taking lives, and devastating the environment. We must look for solutions to mitigate the impact of these events. At the same time, Let us remember that droughts, floods and fires affect not only us humans, but also nature and, most important, sentient animals. Let me especially draw your attention to the situation of animals, as this is often an issue that is overlooked or treated marginally when considering the effects of human mismanagement on the earth. I turn my comments more directly to the issue of animals because animals are an intrinsic and essential element in the much wider complex of nature. How we raise animals nowadays, I have in mind industrial farms and our growing production and consumption of animal products, contributes enormously to climate change and all its consequences, including loss of biodiversity, water consumption, and environmental pollution. We need to pay much more attention to this issue. I stand firmly against the exploitation of animals and the cruelty that so many of them endure. I believe that every creature has an innate dignity, and I'm further concerned that we may not have come even close to acknowledging the sensory nature of many animals who can feel the consequences of climate warming, lack of water, fires, as well as cruelty of deprivation of liberty and endure suffering. Whilst I sympathise with those who would wish to ban all animal agriculture and consumption, I feel that there is a middle path which needs to be urgently pursued. But there are other equally compelling reasons not to cultivate the consumption of meat. I recently read a well-researched book by Hannah Ritchie entitled "Not the End of the World: How Can We Be the First Generation to Build a Sustainable Planet?" The frightening fact is that over 1/3 of all agricultural land is used for the grazing of cattle, sheep and pigs. Their grazing requires the ever-increasing deforestation of our world, but the return of the meat they provide is small in comparison to the protein and energy provided by a plant-based diet. As a Christian, I see that creation is a delicate balance, and it is entrusted to us as stewards to accommodate and maintain that balance. This is something that many indigenous peoples have so wisely maintained in their lifestyle over many centuries, without injury or harm to the environment in which they live. We have much to learn from them. Many indigenous people see some animals as available for food, but they respect the animals which are either cared for domestically in a dignified way or left in the wild until they are needed for food. Meat has become an industry and a source of enormous profit. We've lost the sense of balance, and in our greed, we have seen animal agriculture as a factory process which often ignores the well-being of the animals, requires deforestation, and increases carbon and methane emissions, contributing to global warming and soil and water pollution. We produce meat which is excessive to the needs of people and even unhealthy to them, while seeing animals as merely a commodity at our disposal to be exploited. The statistics make no sense and are shocking. For instance, for every 100 calories we feed a cow, we get just 3 calories of meat back in return. 97 calories are effectively wasted. For lamb, it's about 4 calories. Pigs would render 10 calories and chicken only 13 calories. In parallel, can you imagine buying a loaf of bread, taking one slice and then throwing the rest away? Livestock are also poor providers of protein. For pork, lamb and beef, more than 90% of the protein they consume from animal food is lost. Nor must we overlook the enormous quantities of water that are consumed by the animals being bred for meat. Agriculture is the largest driver of deforestation and habitat loss. The impact on biodiversity is increasing. Our greed for meat means that many people go hungry, as 70 kilos of grain is used to provide just 1 kilo of meat. We can provide enough food for the world's population, but not if we insist on consuming so much meat. Moderation would transform supply, and we need to recognize that the amount of food produced will not provide food security as climate change impacts on seasons and agriculture. Whether on land or in the ocean, species are hunted by predators. I must acknowledge that throughout the cycles of nature, animals, sea creatures, and insects are all part of one another's diet. Even the greatest creatures, such as whales and elephants, are consumed by smaller species when they die. It is part of the complex web of life. The human race has the unique privilege of recognizing the dignity of every individual creature. From a Christian perspective, I see nothing in the scriptures which would suggest that the consumption of meat is sinful. However, there is nothing which requires the consumption of meat. I must also acknowledge that when the scriptures were written, there was no danger concerning meat consumption and its impact on climate change and the environment, including fresh and seawater. What is very clear throughout the scriptures is the need to care for the wonders of creation and the common home entrusted to us as stewards. There remains the importance of how we measure our consumption against the cost to the environment and our provision of sufficient food for the world's population. When I first heard the appeal that we should eat less meat, I decided that I did not need to eat any meat, and I've not missed it. I limit the amount of fish and dairy products too, but reduction in the consumption of meat is not difficult for anyone, and it would make a big impact. Climate change is a global challenge, and there are many, even small ways in which, as Pope Francis says, each and every one of us has our part to play. Eating less meat will make a considerable difference. Using our cars less and relying on walking or public transport will also have an impact. Avoiding waste, whether food, electricity or water, it all counts. Recycling when we can. It's also important that we voice our concerns to our politicians, who can require radical change, and we must lead by personal example. I wish you well in all that this conference brings together and your discussions in these days.